Are the Cincinnati Bengals on the verge of wasting Joe Burrow's prime? We're going to talk about it. But before we get started, I want to tell you guys to hit that subscribe button, like, comment, and share. And tell a friend, and tell a friend, and tell a friend to continue to support my channel. We're going to get into the Cincinnati Bengals and Joe Burrow and their problems. And, you know, look, I don't know if you guys saw the preseason game that they had against the Washington Commanders on Monday, in which the Commanders just raced up and down the field. Their offense had no issues moving the ball, particularly on the ground. And they ended up scoring 14 points in the first quarter against Cincinnati's starting defense, and it looked relatively easy in how the Commanders were able to move the ball down the field against Cincinnati's defense. And look, it's preseason, and so you don't want to take too much away from preseason. But what we saw from the Cincinnati Bengals on that drive against the Commanders was basically a replica of what they did last season on defense, in which the Cincinnati Bengals were eminently one of the worst defenses in the league. They were 25th in points allowed. They were 25th in total yards. They were 28th in defensive DVOA. You know, they were 21st against the pass, 19th against the run. I mean, it was bad. I mean, the Bengals were a bottom 5 defense practically all season long, you know, and so it helps me wonder about what's going on with the Cincinnati Bengals. And keep this in mind with the Cincinnati Bengals. They're having trouble inking an extension with arguably their best defensive player, Trey Hendrickson. You know, their elite pass rusher, who's probably the only thing they have going for them on that side of the ball. You know, you look at what Trey Hendrickson did, you know, over the last 2 years, he's had 17.5 sacks in back-to-back seasons. You know, he had 17.5 sacks in 2024, and he had 17.5 sacks in 2023. And so this is a dude, you know, who's racking up, you know, sacks with relative ease, you know, and even before that, he had a season where he had 8 sacks, and then I think his first season in Cincinnati, he had 14 sacks, and so this is a guy in 3 of his 4 seasons, he's racked up double-digit sacks before having 13.5 sacks in his last year in New Orleans, and I want to say, was it 2020? And so this is a guy that's one of the best pass rushers in the league, and for whatever reason, the Cincinnati Bengals are like, nah. We don't want to pay him. We don't want to pay him everything that we have. We're just gonna let him be disgruntled, and we're just gonna play hardball with him, and we're just gonna be cheap. You know, we're gonna do all of these shenanigans, and we're just gonna let Trey Hendrickson hang out to dry, and we're just gonna play hardball with him and see what happens. And so that's what it seems to me with what the Cincinnati Bengals are doing. But I'm just looking at what's going on with the Bengals, and I'm just like, guys, you have an elite, a guy that many people consider to be a top 3 quarterback in the league, Joe Burrow. Like, you have him on your team. You have Jamar Chase, who might be the best receiver in football. You know, you have T. Higgins, who might be the best number 2 receiver in football. You know, like, what are you guys doing? Like, we have a very good offense, and we're just letting it all waste because we can't figure out how to build a defense around our guys, and we're having contract issues with Trey Hendrickson, and it just leaves me just thinking to myself, I think the Cincinnati Bengals are wasting Joe Burrow's prime. I really believe that. I think it's clear as day that the Cincinnati Bengals are wasting Joe Burrow's prime. And I think it's pretty disappointing with what's transpiring in Cincinnati and with their organization. Because you look at Joe Burrow. I mean, I have my qualms with Joe Burrow. And basically my qualms with Joe Burrow is the fact that many people think he's better than Lamar Jackson, which he is not. And so that's basically my qualm that I have with Joe Burrow. But outside of that, I mean, there's no question this dude's still one of the top, at least 4 quarterbacks in the league. You look at the elite quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, I think most people would say that the consensus best quarterbacks in the league would be Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Joe Burrow. Like, those would be like the top 4. It's like those 4 guys, and then it's everybody else. And so I think people would assume that, would come to an agreement on that. But here's the thing. You look at Patrick Mahomes, you look at Lamar Jackson, you look at Josh Allen. All 3 of those guys have some semblance of an infrastructure with them. Like, you know that they have good coaches. You know they have good schemes. You know that they have a good enough defense that can support their talent, and they have enough help where they don't have to be awesome every single game for them to win on most occasions. Like, they have support around them, especially in particular on the defense side of the ball. And the fact that if they don't have it on offense, that we might be okay regardless. Especially when you look at Patrick Mahomes. Like, if we're going to be honest with Patrick Mahomes, like, his last couple of seasons with the Kansas City Chiefs, like, he hasn't really been, like, outworldly incredible. He just makes plays situationally when it matters the most, because their defense in Kansas City has been good enough to let Patrick Mahomes hang around for him to make the big-time plays whenever those big-time plays needed to be made. Like, that's kind of been the case in Kansas City for the last couple of seasons. That really hasn't been the case in Cincinnati. With Cincinnati, Joe Burrow has to do everything. And when you look at what's happening, what's shaping up to be the case this season with the Bengals, especially if you look at how that preseason game played out on Monday against the Commanders, it seemed like it's very possible, maybe even likely, that in order for the Cincinnati Bengals to win ball games, they're going to have to score 30 to 35 points every Sunday, which means every game is going to be 35 to 30. Every game. And that's just a lot to ask for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in that offense. It's just this. And look, man, like, I can't help but think with what's been happening with Joe Burrow and how the Cincinnati Bengals are wasting his talent. I can't help myself but think that it's eerily similar to the Atlanta Falcons wasting Matt Ryan. Yeah. They're very similar in that aspect, because as an Atlanta Falcon fan, I feel that the Atlanta Falcons wasted Matt Ryan's prime. Very. I mean, you look at what Matt Ryan did over a stretch from 2011 to 2020. Matt Ryan had 10 consecutive seasons in which he threw for over 4,000 yards passing. And on average, he averaged 28 touchdowns to 12 interceptions and had a quarterback rating of 95 over that stretch. Really good. And so when you look at that stretch of what Matt Ryan was doing from 2011 to 2020, when he was racking up all the passing yards and the touchdowns and the interceptions, do you know that the Atlanta Falcons only made the playoffs 4 times in the 10 seasons that Matt Ryan threw for over 4,000 yards? The Falcons only made the playoffs 4 times. You know why Matt Ryan was never able to lead the Falcons to even more winning success as an Atlanta Falcon over that stretch? It's because he didn't have a defense. He never had a defense. Even now, we're begging for the Atlanta Falcons to have some semblance of a pass rush. We're hoping that, the guys that the Falcons drafted, with Jalen Walker and James Pierce, that these guys are the answer to our pass rushing problems, and that hopefully that maybe soon we'll have a defense. But throughout Matt Ryan's career, that has never been the case. Matt Ryan and Julio Jones, and earlier with Roddy White, and so on and so forth, we've had to score 30 points every game for the Falcons to have a chance to win games, and more oftentimes than not, it was never enough, because the defense just was never able to make plays and get stops and help out the offense. So as a result, more oftentimes than not, the Falcons will usually be left home with an L because the defense was never able to do its job on most Sundays. And unfortunately, in the case of Matt Ryan, because of those missed playoff seasons, it really might have cost him a Hall of Fame berth. I think Matt Ryan, if I'm being honest, he might not make the Hall of Fame because of how bad, the defenses was throughout his tenure and how the Falcons missed the playoffs, from that stretch of 2011 to 2020. Like I said earlier, the Atlanta Falcons only made the playoffs 4 times over the 10 seasons that Matt Ryan was able to rack out, the passing yards, the 4,000 consecutive passing yard seasons that he had. And I look and I think of Joe Burrow, and I'm pretty nervous that I think Cincinnati and this Bengals organization is going to ruin his career. And he's going to have a lot of seasons where he's going to rack out a lot of yards, and he's going to throw for a lot of touchdowns, and he's going to develop real chemistry with his receiver, Jamar Chase, and that's going to be all for naught because the Cincinnati Bengals are going to leave home with an L, and they're going to lose games 35-30, and the defense is not going to be able to stop a cold, and the Bengals are going to miss the playoffs again moving forward. And he's going to have a lot, and I'm afraid that Joe Burrow is going to have a lot of missed empty seasons because the defense and the organization is going to let this dude down. And I think it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate what's happening with the Cincinnati Bengals and, their situation. You have an owner in Mike Brown who's, we all know it, he's been cheap. He doesn't pay players. He let go of Jesse Bates a few years ago. He went to my Falcons, and I can assure you this: the Cincinnati Bengals fans know what they missing with Jesse Bates. You wouldn't think they wouldn't love to have him on their team right now? I'm just saying, and the Bengals let him go because the Bengals are cheap, and so. Like I said, man, it's really unfortunate with what's going on with the Cincinnati Bengals. It's really unfortunate, because I'm a Joe Burrow fan. I like Joe Burrow a lot. I think Joe Burrow is one of the elite quarterbacks in the league. But unfortunately, between him and Jamar Chase, who I also love, like I said, he's one of the top 2 receivers in the league. Like, people will probably I'm sure most people believe this. The consistent best receivers in the league is Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. And as an Atlanta Falcon fan, you can make an argument the Atlanta Falcons should have took Jamar Chase instead of Kyle Pitts, in 2021. And so I know how great Jamar Chase is, and it just seems to me that the Cincinnati Bengals are just wasting their talent, just wasting the talent of those 2 individuals. And it's pretty unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, it's starting to become a little bit of a state of affairs when it comes to the Cincinnati Bengals, and what was happening with their organization and how you look at what they're going to put on the field. I mean, defensively especially, I mean, if Monday's performance against the Commanders was any indication, it's looking like the Cincinnati Bengals once again this season is going to have one of the worst defenses in the league. And if you look at the competition in the AFC, and look, on the last episode, I did predict the Bengals would make the playoffs, but I had them as a wild card team. And look, and to me, look, I picked the Bengals to make the playoffs because that's just and that's really due to the faith that I have in Joe Burrow. But it doesn't mean, and Jamar Chase, but that doesn't mean that it's a guarantee. Their team, like their roster's flawed on especially on the defensive side of the ball. And you look at the competition in the AFC. I mean, Kansas City. You look at the AFC West, Kansas City, Denver, the Chargers, even the Raiders. Like all four of those teams, you can make a case all four of those teams could be pretty good this coming year. All four of them. And that's just in the AFC West. You got the Buffalo Bills. The Patriots, I think, should be better. That's in the AFC East. You look at the AFC South. You have the Houston Texans and the Jacksonville Jaguars. Those two teams are expected to be competitive. And then you look at the AFC North. I mean, you got the Ravens and even the Steelers. And look, I'm not sold on Aaron Rodgers, but the Steelers are, they've been a consistent 9-10 win team. For the last few years under Mike Tomlin. If there's one thing we know about Mike Tomlin, the Steelers are going to be good. They're going to be solid. And he's going to have that team, in the thick of things. He hasn't had a losing season. So that kind of tells you, about Mike Tomlin's resume with the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's a lot of competitive teams in the AFC that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to have to compete with. And if they're going to have issues on the defensive side of the ball, and if they're going to be awful, and if Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense is going to have to score 30 to 35, maybe even 40 points every Sunday to win, then it could be trouble for the Cincinnati Bengals this season. And so, but, those are my thoughts with what's happening with the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, I'm starting to feel bad for Joe Burrow. And Jamar Chase. I'm really am. Like, when I look at what's happening with the Bengals, I can't help but think of what happened to my Falcons back from 2011 to 2020 when, Matt Ryan and Julio Jones had to carry the offense each and every week, and the Falcons had to score a lot of points for them to win, and they had to be perfect every single week just for them to have a chance. And more oftentimes than not, they lost games and they didn't have a chance. They couldn't win because the defense just couldn't make stops when it mattered. And that was to the tune of the Atlanta Falcons having 6 missed playoff appearances in 10 seasons during that stretch where Matt Ryan was playing really good football, and he was throwing for a lot of passing yards. Like I said, Matt Ryan had 10 consecutive seasons in which he threw for 4,000 or more yards. 10 consecutive seasons. And the Falcons only made the playoffs 4 times. That could be a similar fate with what's going on with what could happen with the Cincinnati Bengals. If their defense can't get right. And if the organization doesn't make good decisions, and they don't eventually pay someone like a Trey Hendrickson, who's one of the elite pass rushers in the league. And so, I'm a little worried with what's going on with the Cincinnati Bengals. And I gotta say this, but Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase deserve better with what's happening with the Cincinnati Bengals right now. And it's just something that just needs to be said.